so much, everyone, for joining us in this CTLT Spring Institute session, Teaching Remotely in the Midst of a Crisis, How to Keep Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion in Mind. I'm Natasha Fox. I'm a graduate academic assistant at the Equity and Inclusion Office and a PhD candidate in the Department of Geography at UBC, where I'm also a TA. Today we are joined by three distinguished panelists who I'll introduce in a moment, as well as Jocelyn McAuliffe of the CTLT, who's here for technical support and to help familiarize some of us with this learning platform, Collaborate. Also supporting today for the Q&A in particular are Hannah Itzgada from the EIO and Hélène Frohard-Dorent from the CTLT and the EIO. Sorry for butchering your name, Hélène. My French is a little rusty. So today, just to walk you through the plan this morning, first we have introductions at 9 to 9:05, as well as a brief overview. Then we'll do a little Collaborate tutorial with thanks to Jocelyn for walking us through that. Following that, we have a very brief overview of EDI and online teaching, and then we'll launch into the panel Q&A with some prepared questions for our panelists. Today's panelists are Aftab Erfan from the Equity Inclusion Office and School of Community and Regional Planning, Louise Longridge, Department of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences, and Afsaneh Sharif, Center for Teaching and Learning and Technology. Following that, we'll have a brief wrap-up, and I'll introduce a new handout that we've been working on to introduce you to some important aspects of online learning and teaching from an EDI perspective. All right, so before Jocelyn walks us through the Collaborate platform, I'd like to direct your attention to a couple of guidelines and things to note in order to help things go smoothly today. First, please write your questions in the chat box and note that not all questions will be answered. Hannah is going to help us handpick some questions that we think many of you may want to ask. And if you're writing in the chat box is difficult for you, please use the raise hand function to speak up. We want to minimize that function because of the number of participants this morning. We have a large group, so if you're able to type in the chat box, please do so, but otherwise please use the raise your hand function if you have something to ask. Also, just want to remind you to please keep your microphone and video muted except for when you're speaking, and also please turn off other sound notifications if you have those on your Outlook or other things that can pop up and interrupt people when speaking. All right, with that, I will ask Jocelyn to please take over for a little 5-minute tutorial for Collaborate so that we are all relatively familiar with using this platform. Thank you, Jocelyn.
Thanks, Natasha. Welcome, everybody. So we are in Collaborate now, and feel free to chime in the chat if you're new to Collaborate or have used it lots. We'll just keep this very brief. The main things to be aware of are in the center bottom of your screen. So the microphone, so controlling when you're on and off. And please do keep the mic off, as Natasha mentioned, when you're not speaking. And as facilitators, we can actually turn your mic off for you if we notice that it is on during a time when you're not active. The webcam can also be turned on or off. For now, the baseline, it would be great to keep them off just in consideration of bandwidth. When we have lots of webcams all on at the same time, it can slow the system for those who have like lower internet speed and connectivity. And then the raise hand function is right beside there. There's also a fun way to create like quick responses. So on the little person icon in the bottom that isn't referenced, you can choose a status. So there's ones around happy or surprised or sad or agree or disagree. So those are available to you as well. It looks like many people have already found the chat function in the panel to the side. You can also manage your settings in the cog that's furthest to the right on your screen. And you'll notice that there are some notification settings in there, and you can customize. I'd suggest turning your audio notifications off. As there are many people in this room, you might get a lot of notifications from raised hands and chat messages. So that's just one thing to consider. And I'll also make a note about the recording. The session is being recorded, as Natasha mentioned. And the way that Collaborate anonymizes the chat is that it blinds the username. So for example, if I put something instead of Jocelyn, it would end up saying user 1. But if somebody refers to your name in text, that doesn't become anonymized. It does stay preserved in the chat, just as a clarification there. Great, and I'll switch you back to the PowerPoint and get back to Natasha. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand now or ask it in the chat. Thanks, Mai.
Hi everyone. Hi Jocelyn. I see that Bean pointing out that the confirmation link that Suki and Elisa are putting up in the chat room. It may not be working for some people, but I'm not really sure how to address that. Suki or Elisa, do you know the link or?
It's worked. I think they're just referring to the BB Ultra link, but it's taken care of, Hanai.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Great. Okay, thank you again, Jocelyn, for that. And if you wouldn't mind putting the PowerPoint back up. Oh, there we go. Wonderful. Thank you. So switching back to the content for today's session, we have a couple of learning outcomes today. We hope that you will think about the relationship between online learning and equity, diversity, and inclusion. And also, we hope that you will share your experiences and concerns around issues of EDI in the online teaching environment. We won't be offering technical instruction today because this session is really specifically aimed at maintaining an EDI lens in online teaching, and we're most concerned with this particularly sudden shift to online learning rather than kind of carefully designing an online course. So I would ask that you try and keep your questions and kind of thinking about this within these parameters for today. All right, so first off, what do we mean when we say EDI? So we're talking about equity, diversity, and inclusion, and in particular, the valuing of equity of access and opportunity for members of underrepresented and equity-seeking groups. Taking action to identify and address barriers to the full participation of members of these groups in the course that you teach, and an intentional and ongoing commitment to teaching in a way that all students feel that their differences are valued and respected and have equitable access to learning and other educational opportunities and are supported to learn to their full potential. We are not talking about a static checklist. We want you to bear in mind that these changing contexts of the crisis that we find ourselves in now will necessitate changing approaches to this teaching strategy. All right, so now what happens to these principles when a class suddenly goes all online? We think there are some specific considerations that can help instructors maintain a commitment to EDI. One way to do this is by offering support and resources to your students, which means first familiarizing yourself with what is available out there. And I listed a few things here for you, but after the session, we're going to share more resources like these. So an important point of keeping your session as equity, diversity, and inclusion focused as possible is just knowing what's available to your students and being prepared to help them access those resources. Another important consideration is to try and adjust your own expectations. For most of us, myself included, these past few months were a really stunning change from normal life. And in order to get through that, I think we're all going to have to ask ourselves, where can we find room to not be perfect and ideal in our teaching? Is it realistic to make a huge, radical, sudden shift in a way that seamlessly transitions your course from in-person to online? And how does this translate to your expectations for your students? Is it critical, for example, that students are all online at the same time of day in an online course, especially given that many of our students now are scattered throughout the globe, having been suddenly sent back to their home countries or other places where they live, taking care of family members and having children at home, all of these things. So kind of tempering expectations around what you might normally expect in your course. In line with this, we also encourage instructors to increase flexibility across the board as much as possible. That is, to try to make the class parameters as flexible as possible for all students in order to cut down on the number of individual accommodations that you might be asked to make. And some ways in which you might consider doing that are by creating multiple options for course participation for your students, favoring low stakes and or optional assignments, and also giving students plenty of time to complete exams. I did just see some requests coming in for the PowerPoint to be shared with participants. We are going to be sharing this. The entire session is actually being recorded, so this will all be available to participants who have registered for this session. Correct me if I'm wrong, please, Hanai. Moving on. Lastly, we want to remind you to try and continue to be responsive to students' individual needs. Even with increased flexibility, some students will still need individual accommodations because of their personal circumstances. We all have many added burdens and layers of uncertainty now. Just a reminder to try and be kind and accommodate students' needs as much as you can, given that many students and their families are very directly impacted by this crisis, and they didn't sign up for an online course, just like you didn't sign up to teach one. So these are just a few guidelines that we hope will help you as you transition to online teaching. And as I said, we're going to direct you to some additional resources after this session, and we hope that you'll have a chance to learn more there. Now, just a reminder that in the chat box there is an attendance link that's been shared. If you would kindly follow that link and just quickly fill out that you were here, we appreciate that very much. That's for the CTL. All right, so now we wish to change gears and turn your attention to our wonderful distinguished panelists once again, who are going to share their experiences with us this morning. We've prepared a couple of questions to kick things off, and while the panelists are answering these questions, I just want to remind you participants to please chime in that chat box. If you have something that worked well for you or an experience that might be of value to others that are joining us today, then by all means, please share those by typing that info into the chat box. Or if you're unable to type for any reason, you're welcome to use the raise hand function, and we'll try and get your questions or contributions included in this panel. And as Hanai just reminded us, please share any strategies that may have worked for you. We want to keep the session as interactive as possible, and we know there's a lot of experience and expertise in this room this morning, so we're eager to draw upon that as much as possible. All right, so the first question that we have prepared for our panelists this morning are for each of you, if you would please, what are some of the key considerations around EDI and an online format? First, if I could ask Aftab to kindly share some insights on your key considerations around EDI in an online format, please, Aftab.
Great, thank you. And assuming you can hear me, yes?
Yes, loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. I have all the usual butterflies that I get when I'm on a panel, even though I can't see anybody, so that's kind of fascinating. I did write down a couple of things, and I would say these have somewhat to do with my my experience of teaching, which is in fairly small seminar type classrooms. So I was this term teaching a class of 25, so that this may or may not apply to the context that you're working in, but I thought I would share from my perspective. And I have three key considerations. The first one is what, Natasha, you've already been touching on, and said differently. I would say that at a time like this, our teaching needs to be trauma informed, just to put the kind of fancy term on it for the time being. And that is what you've spoken to about the need for flexibility, recognizing that people have very different contexts that they're coming from, and some of them are dealing with a lot, they're struggling with quite a bit. So the need for kindness, the need for sharing of resources, giving lots of options in terms of how people participate, including the kind of, even within my class, as a session is ongoing, I might say to the students, if this is not right for you, if you need to leave at any time, if the content is too much or there's too much going on in the background, just feel free to leave. And some of my students have, and I tend to think that's the right thing to do, is to give that option very explicitly. In terms of just just to mention that we know from an equity and inclusion perspective that some students are impacted disproportionately or in a different way. Definitely students who are living with poverty. A lot of the racialized students, we know from the data from the US that racialized communities are impacted differently. The indigenous communities seem to be impacted differently. Men in a whole other way seem to be impacted differently. There's all this research now about the lack of connection between men and how that makes them more vulnerable in a time like this in terms of their own well-being. So I think we want to just kind of have that lens of how are people being impacted, and to check up on the students that we are worried about. Just a reminder that the early alert program is still going on. I found that because I wasn't in the classroom with the students, it was a little bit harder to pick up on who's struggling and what is going on, and so I've had to do a little bit more emailing and checking up on people, and connecting them with what they need if the need arises. The second point to make briefly is that at a time like this, there's actually a need for increased connection. We hear so much about people craving connection, and especially marginalized students craving connection. Online clearly is no replacement for in-person gatherings, but I think we are trying to create some form of connection in the courses that we are running. Most people have gravitate towards some kind of blended learning, and I've seen a lot of use of video. I just want to make a point that video and synchronous ways of connecting, while they're really great for connection, they have also definitely quite a bit of downside. So definitely around the digital divide and who has access to good connection, and is that going to sustain, especially a video chat. There are new forms of disability that we are noticing. One would be sensitivity to artificial light. You might even be suffering from that yourself. So just to kind of be aware that that might be coming up, especially if people are videoing a lot. And then the lack of privacy, especially for students who have children or who have other family members who may not have access to a private room to take a video call. Lack of control over physical setting that you're inviting other people into via video. So the term that has been coined around this is actually video classism, which is that your class or your socioeconomic background has become much more visible to people that you're interacting with through video. And this creates quite a bit of anxiety for a lot of students. So the option to have a virtual background put in or not turn on video seems to be really important. And the last one is the lack of control over your own personal appearance. So again, this might have to do with class. We're also hearing, especially from the queer community, for some of the gender non-conforming students, gender fluid students that we work with, hair is a big issue, and how they appear on video when they can't get the haircut that they want, and the connection with that and their gender expression is something to pay attention to. So a lot of people may not want to do video. Exploring things to do by voice seems really important to me, because it's a good way of keeping the connection, but not forcing people necessarily to show you their living room and what they're living with. And then one last consideration, if I can, is the need to address what we might call microaggression in the online space. And I say micro, but I don't mean to minimize it, because it is actually a very big issue for a lot of the students. It does appear that there is a tendency in this moment, as people are panicking and are in a lot of anxiety, for there to be also a loss of sympathy for other people, and to be quite a bit of judgment against other people. And I'm not saying that we are seeing this at UBC necessarily, but in the online space broadly, and the stories from the bigger community indicate some of that. Definitely a rise in anti-Asian racism, given where the virus is perceived to have come from. Quite a bit of comments around what am I called, fat phobia, this kind of like, I'm staying at home and I'm eating so much and I'm going to get very fat, and the negative connotations of that, and how that can be hurtful to other people hearing that. There's quite a bit of stigma around disabilities, even in the discourse around, how people want to make decisions about their own life. If I end up on a ventilator, do I want to be taken off? I've heard a couple of instances of people taking that to mean that to live with a disability, or to be on a ventilator, or to be on life support, or to need to live without some of your organs, that there's stigma actually attached to that as people are speaking about that. So I think my general suggestion is that as instructors, if we notice microaggressions happening in the discussions in the classroom, or sometimes in the side chat bar, or in discussion forums, or in different venues that where we are teaching, just like in a classroom, it's very important to notice that, and either to call it out or to call it in. So you might, if you're calling it out, just problematize the suggestions and the discourse, and get people to be more thoughtful by challenging it very gently. Or you might speak to the person, to the student who has made the comments individually, and try to get them to see some of the impact of what they're saying. I think for the most part, people are not doing it on purpose. There's a lot of people speaking about their own struggle and their own experience and their own, ways of wanting to make the environment safe for them, but it does come across as a judgment on somebody else. So if you notice that, not to let it go unmentioned, and not to just drop it. And if there's a need for more hints around that, our office would be a good one to reach out to Equity and Inclusion for some more tips on that. I think I'll leave it at that, and happy to take any other questions later.
Well, thank you very much, Aftab, for that very, very informative and thoughtful response to the question. A lot to consider there, in particular around the ways that the online context in particular brings certain things to the fore in ways that maybe the face-to-face context did not. So I want to give the other panelists a chance to also answer this question. If we could ask Afsaneh to please chime in on your key considerations around EDI in an online format, please. Afsaneh.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Hope you and your family are doing well, which is the most important thing right now, that we all take care of ourselves and our health. I think that I would like to share with you the key consideration in online learning from an instructional designer perspective. And in general, what do we mean by inclusive design? In summary, I can say that the design of your course content, activity, assessment in a way that is accessible and usable by as many students as possible without the need for modification. Inclusive design is something that is not only for remote or online learning, it's something that is encouraged for face-to-face, and it's focused on diversity. And why it matters is that with any decision that we make in our course content, in our classroom, particularly when it goes to online, we may raise barriers or lower barriers for our participants. And it is important to know that some of the things that we can do, even in a small pieces, it can reduce the barriers for our participants, and more students can access our content. In the next slide, I will share with you some of the things that we can do in order make our teaching more inclusive. Make sure that you incorporate diversity into your overall curriculum. And what do I mean by that? It means that any small pieces that you can do to integrate diversity into the elements of the course, it is important. For example, in your syllabus, you can start to make sure that you have enough information for your students, and you have shared what you expect from them and what they can expect from you. It is important to include some of the resources that Aftab already referred to in your syllabus, because that would be one way that the students can find information about academic advice, accessibility, about mental health, about their health, about financial aids, about technical support. Those are the key important things that you need to ensure that you have those information available for students. You can look at equity and diversity from different lenses, it's a broad umbrella. And the more you provide those information in your course, even through your left navigation bar in a paragraph with all the contact information for students to be able to reach those support, it's important. It is also important to create a safe learning environment. Whatever tools you use, it is important to make sure that you set and consult with your students and set some ground rules for them to know how to participate in the discussion, in the classroom, in the activity, how to connect, and so on. So it's important when it goes to online. It's different. Students have the lack of body language, and there are so many things that through synchronous and asynchronous they might lose. So it is important to create that environment and communicate. It is important also communicate with your learners to see that where they are, how they feel, and particularly at this time, it's a challenging time. So it's important to look and to see that how flexible you can be and how they need to make some shifts or changes in order to make sure that they successfully complete their courses. Be proactive, as I say, in connecting with your students and learning about them. Take time to assess the classroom climate. I know that in the last few weeks, everything has been such a in a very complex and speedy mood. But I would say that from now on, we need to kind of get used to this format and make sure that how we can integrate equity and inclusion with the process, within the process, and how we move forward and we move more content online. Be reflective. And one of the key things that I want to share with you through instructional designer perspective is that check on universal design for learning. Briefly, I can say that it's focused on 3 principles. It tells you that if you're producing content, anything, activity, assessment, final exam online, make sure that you provide multiple means of representation, which means if you have images, do you have alternative text for those images? You may say that, well, this is not a time and I don't have the time for that. You have to make sure that you have contacted the accessibility office. If you have students who are using assistive technology, they need to be supported. So those are the things that you need to consider. Another thing is that provide multiple means of engagement. Not every students are engaged to be in a group. Some prefer to do things individually. Also, there are things that you need to consider that not everyone gets motivated with something new or challenging. Some people get actually engage when things are scaffolded. So although the session is not about UDL, but I would definitely recommend to check on that. And we will share with you some of the handouts or some of the resources that are useful. I would definitely recommend you to look at the digital accessibility handout, which is 2-page telling you how to make your online content including images, content, and videos more accessible to your students. And the reason it's good to do more inclusively with your teaching and look at how to integrate diversity and EDI in your curriculum is that you can connect and engage with your students. You're ready for spark moments. I can say that you will have more challenges if you haven't taught online, with students not being able during this time not get along to work in a group, or some of the discussions or thread of discussion might go in a not the way that you want it. So the more you know about your students, the more you communicate with them, you will be prepared with this kind of situation. And when you make the content provide different options for them to demonstrate their knowledge to you, it becomes more meaningful because they bring topics or activities that are more relevant to them and meaningful. And once you create an environment which is safe, they feel comfortable to voice their ideas, challenges, questions, and so on. So it's important to create that option and give them different options how to connect with you. Not only synchronous or video, you might just ask them to come up with some idea, if it's through discussion, through emails, and considering the different ways that you can connect with them. And students are more likely to experience success in their course when the activities support their learning and background and culture. For that, I think that I'll pass it to the next presenter at this time.
Thank you so much, Afsaneh, for that very, very thorough and informative answer. Lastly, I'd like to give our third panelist, Louise, a chance to answer this question as well. Louise, if you'd be so kind to just quickly walk us through some of your considerations around EDI in the online format. Thank you.
Absolutely, no problem. Could you pop my PowerPoint up? Thank you. So just a quick nutshell, I guess I've been teaching online courses in Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences for over 10 years. So I guess I'm in the fortunate position of really having a lot of time to think my courses through and develop them and make changes over that period. So I'm kind of hoping today to just pass along a little bit of what I've gathered so that people who are in a lot more of a rush with the current situation can hopefully pull something from that. So one thing that was interesting is that there's actually been a survey of priorities identified by UBC students about their learning environment. And it was a fairly big survey and it came out with some pretty concise results. Students really want their courses to be simple, user-friendly interfaces, so just get on and go, and convenience and access are really important to them. So schedule options is also important. And they want one single spot where they can go and find everything out they need to know about the course. So not the content, but everything else that wraps that course up into a bundle, you know, assessments and all of that stuff, and how to contact you and all that jazz. And then they want to be able to communicate with their peers and their teachers, and they're often confused about how to go about doing that. So what I've done, along with an instructional designer that I worked with for almost 10 years, Josefina Rosada, she and I developed what we called our one-page syllabus. So this on the screen you can see here is from my first year course, Mesozoic Earth, Time of the Dinosaurs. And it's just a sample page. But this is basically when the students click in, this is what they see, the home page here. And then they would actually click in to start here, syllabus. So I keep it really straightforward. There's multiple hundreds of students in this class. So, you know, the less confusion, the better. Basically, you want them to just literally follow along the dotted lines. So if you could advance to the next slide. Great. And now here's what they see when they click into that syllabus. Then what we have here is a one-page syllabus. So this is our index with all the different pieces. And that just runs all the way straight down the page with little tabs that'll get you back to the top at the bottom of each one of these sections. But basically the student can start at the top and just read the whole thing. And when they've done that, they could walking away with all the information that's required for them to be successful in this class. So just a really brief run through, because I know we're under the gun here. There's a quick welcome from me and just saying hi, who I am, and kind of what I expect of them a little bit. And then communicating between all of us. So I actually put my email and then the TA's email, and also the hours that I think that they're going to be able to best get in touch with us. That's often a big question, like, are you going to be available on the weekend? Are you going to be available past 6 o'clock? So those are the kind of things I answer there. Then I throw in the course overview just to talk about what they're going to be learning in a broad sense. And the course learning goals are there. And then I move into the more nitty gritty. So it's the course layout and schedule. So how the course is designed and numerous modules or however you design it. And what the exact schedule is for those modules. So when will they be open? When will they close? Where do they need to be? Then we move over to the other side. We see assessment values and course grade. That's pretty obvious. It's broken down exactly for them. Study techniques include things about how it's best to study, like, for example, multiple sessions and test yourself in different ways or design different problems. And then there's also a session on how not to study, like passive reading and, you know, repetitive questions that you already know how to solve, that kind of thing. How to proceed is just what they should do first and how they are best to move forward. And then I do have a pretty big chunky part, FAQs, which is all the problems that I've had come up in the course over the years. And the students really seem to like that. And finally, the last piece is wellness, accessibility, and academic resources. So wellness includes multiple links. There's something called Campus Lightbox. I don't know how many of you have heard of that, but basically that links to all mental health resources for UBC and a little wider outside of UBC as well. So that's a huge resource for them. Center for Accessibility is on there. I have things like the library system, how to access that, technology. There's just a bunch of different resources. So that's right there for them to use as well. Okay, next slide, please. Great. Oh, back one. Yep. So basically, just a quick nutshell, this is the kind of stuff that I get all the time from my students regarding this one-page syllabus, how much they like this syllabus, how it's easy for them to understand and a huge help, and really helps them to start off feeling organized in the course. It's clear, there's no arguing, the schedule is set on day one, that kind of stuff. So basically, over the years, that's kind of where this thing has evolved to. And I think the students really love it. So I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Louise, for that very thoughtful and practical walkthrough of some of the importance of clarity and accessibility with regard to syllabus preparation for courses. At this time, we did have some prepared questions for our panelists, but I think in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and turn it over to you participants. We have a lot of thoughtful questions coming in, and I'd like to invite my colleague Hanai, please, to select a few of those questions for our panelists and let panelists answer those. If you could, please, Hanai. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Natasha, and thank you, panelists. It was great, very thorough responses. It goes really deep. And thank you for contributing your questions and comments. And then I'm just reviewing the questions that you have contributed so far in the chat room. Several questions kind of related to, so to speak, classroom climate in the online settings. So the first question we got from Sue Ann is, how do we maybe the panelists, if I will bring in the question, and then if you can answer the question, raise the hand just so that we don't have to kind of keep looking at each other's screen, like who's going to answer first. So the first question from Sue Ann, how do we assess the classroom environment virtually? Can anyone answer the question? Any ideas? Okay, Afsaneh.
I think that there are different ways that you can do that. One is that perhaps depending on the number of students and depending of knowing your students and subject, I always say take different approaches. One would be a quick survey. The information that you want to know about your students, the background information, their internet access, or sometimes you might just send an announcement throughout the feature that you have available online to ask students. I myself try to use it differently. I have some information at the beginning of the class on the syllabus to ask students and encourage them to contact me directly when they have any concerns through email. I also put some virtual hours for students if they want to have one-on-one session synchronously. Sometimes I have this small survey depending of if I see some complexity or some difficulty within the classroom online or through discussions, or if I see some of the things that students may have some problem, I try to do a quick survey in order to find out that how can I help, what is the speed, or what kind of activities they feel that is good or they may want to change. I give them options to choose. So either through announcement, virtual hours that you put through emails, or if needed, depending of where your students are, sometimes you might say that from this time I'm available, this is my phone. But it's all depends on what you have as resources and depending on number of students and depending on the subject. Hope this helps.
Thank you, Afsaneh. And then I heard from the audience that my voice is breaking out. I just turned off the video just to save my bandwidth, and hopefully my sound is raising hand. So Aftab, chime in.
Great, thank you. I think along the same lines of what Afsaneh had just mentioned, I think the biggest challenge of having gone online for me has been all of a sudden I feel like I don't have eyes on the street or ear to the ground or whatever metaphor we use for that. But it's much harder, just to say, it's much harder to pick up on what's happening in the group when we are online because we don't have the body language. I'm just suffering from not having your body language right now. Jocelyn, could you put up the one slide that I had brought in? And I'm just going to speak to it for a minute, which is to say, so the only replacement I can really think of for body language and those subtle cues that we pick up from students is, as Afsaneh says, is to ask them directly what is going on for them. So been doing my teaching in Zoom, and I got really interested in the poll function of Zoom, and so these are some of the poll questions that I created. One is about the comfort and familiarity with Zoom. One that's really like, how are you doing right now? That exercise that we just did, or that check-in that we just did it make you feel better, worse, or no change? And then how frustrated are you with technology? And I just kind of have these polls ready, and I would use them. My course is a 3-hour, it's a long chunk of time, synchronous, and so I would use them often, like multiple times during the session, after every breakout session or exercise that we've gone through, like how is it going for people. And I actually found, it was very nice to have a very explicit sense of, here's the graph of how people are doing in the class. It's going too fast or too slow, or this thing, I'm pushing it too much, I'm trying to do too much, or I'm not trying to do enough. I think unless we ask directly, we're not going to know that. And just to put a point on it around DI is, I think we want to be cognizant that marginalized students, I'm thinking right now about first generation students, so students who are the first of their family to be at the university, their parents didn't go to university, they're much less likely to raise issues if something isn't working for them, because they do not feel totally comfortable in the environment or don't know what is okay to do, what's not okay to do. Often we find that marginalized students would not be likely to raise issue that is going on for them unless they're explicitly asked. So an anonymous poll is kind of a lovely way of making sure that those voices come in, because they're not going to come necessarily to your office hours or send you a specific question. So I would just kind of, again, as Natasha said in the beginning, it's like, actually just put that question to everybody, or make the change in arrangement for everybody, so that it's not an additional burden for marginalized students to have to raise something. Back to you,
Thank you,
Hannah.
Afsaneh. Okay, thank you. That's great. Thank you so much for great answers. And then this kind of connects well. It's now I wanted to ask about kind of concrete strategies for generating a sense of connectedness and a sense of community for students without having to really use synchronous instruction. So what are some of the ways in which we may be able to develop kind of sense of connections? Like after I've mentioned about some marginalized students especially may not feel kind of instant sense of connections with everyone in the classroom. So then what are some of the ways to do that not necessarily relying on the synchronous approaches? Okay, I see Louise's hand. So go ahead, Louise. Louise? I saw your hand up.
Could you please put my second 3 slides up, because it speaks to this quite well.
Jocelyn?
Is that the first one or the fourth one?
That's the fourth one.
Oh, great. Thanks so much. So here we are back at the home page, and actually I'm going to move right into what we were just talking about there with connectivity. Basically, see the start here syllabus in the index, and that's what we talked about previous, and then we had this learning to learn online section. And well, over the years, of the 10 years I've been teaching, basically some students are at very different levels technologically. So what I try to do is I try to bring them all up to a base level so that no one's really at a huge disadvantage. And also we stumble on any issues, and then I can help specific students out if they have accessibility problems or so forth. And also it builds comfort posting on the discussion board, being involved in group discussions, and contacting me personally by email. So what we were just mentioning about connectivity. Next slide, please. So here is just a really basic example of my first year. Again, there are 380 students in this class, and you can put anything you want into this to-do list, but in just a nutshell here, basically I ask them to do the reading pieces so they know what they're doing in the class. And then I actually get them, each of them, to send me a private email to my EOS account, my main department account, which I then reply to. So you can imagine with 380 students that is actually a massive task every term. But you know, if they've gone back and forth with me once, they're much more comfortable reaching out in the future. They know exactly how to do it. They know I'm going to get back to them within a few hours at the longest. So that really has built a lot of comfort for that. And then the assignment one I have posted here is actually a little group assignment where they go up on the discussion board and they bounce around just some fun stuff about paleontology with their classmates. So they get an idea of how to use the discussion board. And the final thing I do in this course is I actually have them do a welcome survey. So it gives me an idea of what they are, you know, who they are and things like that. So next slide, please. So here I just was typing in the comments about this self-enroll Canvas course that Josephina Rosado and I designed. Basically what it is, if anyone's interested in either the one-page syllabus, the learning to learn online piece, or any of just looking at what maybe a lesson looks like in a typical online course, I've allowed access to my lesson 4 here, Decoding Dinosaurs. There's an assignment, and again, this is a first year class, so it's pretty basic stuff, but it shows just a little bit of what that might look like. And actually, Josephina and I did spend a few hours one day actually building the HTML code for the one-page syllabus. So you can just actually copy and paste that code into your course site and then fill in the different pieces, and you'll end up with something that links back up to the next table like this, tabs down, it has all the formatting, it's all done there. And finally, I just wanted to mention this link to student resources. So that was the link to all the resources that I've basically found that I've needed over the years. So that's just in a nutshell. If anyone's interested, this is a self-enroll sandbox course. So you just jump on and you can put yourself in. It's called LDW 101B, Designing Online Course Materials. And I try to keep it up to date. Sometimes it's a little behind my evolution, but this one I think is pretty good at this point. So just thought I'd mention that because a few people seemed interested in the comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. It seems like my sound keeps breaking, and I stopped using my headphone in case my headphone is causing more troubles. But anyways, I'll just try my best. So another question, which is also about kind of a little bit more proactive approach to create more inclusive kind of classroom environments. That this question is from Natalie. So she's wondering if you can make a suggestion for how we could include call-in, call-out kind of group agreements at the beginning of the class, just so that the class is prepared for occasion when the ground rule for respectful environment is breached. Does anyone have a suggestion for how to do that in the online classroom? Aftab?
Yeah, I do. So first of all, just to say, and this is from the research into online conflicts, and where are they happening and where are they not happening, where are some of the microaggressions and conflicts that we've been talking about happening. And it turns out that two things really help. One is agreements, is a kind of group agreements, and the second one is moderation and meaning that the instructor or the TA or somebody in the class is moderating the comments and paying attention to what is happening. And so I just would say they have to go together. You cannot have one without the other. That's the first thing. In the group agreements, so I think if you have a small enough class and you can negotiate what your agreements are around something like call in and call out culture, that would be really great. I would say, because we are in the online form, I actually would say we need more time up front at the beginning of class, getting to know each other, whether we do that synchronistically or through bios that people share, both that and then spending time actually making agreements. So the piece that I would mention in the online is that there's this thing called online disinhibition, which means that when we typing things and are sitting behind our computers, we tend to be more honest and in some ways more brutal, and say things that we would say things in typing that we would never say to the person's face, if that makes sense. So I think it's actually important to make people aware of this phenomena in your discussion around call in and call out, that there tends to be this additional layer of our in-person inhibitions are moved out of the way. So you want to encourage people to actually be more thoughtful in writing. And this question of, would you have said it to the person's face if they were in the room? Would you have said it like that, or would you bring this up? So getting people to be thoughtful about how they're contributing. And then the agreement could be, if we see something that's happening in the discussion board and we have a problem with it, that we point it out, but we don't do it in a way that necessarily attacks the person. You can have all kinds of language around that we do it in the spirit of inquiring into where was that person coming from, what do they mean, and what are the different sides of that issue, or what is a response to that issue from somebody who may not be speaking. So if somebody is saying something that is ignorant, first of all, the question to them would be, where are you getting that? Where is that coming from? And then to say, okay, this is the impact of what you're doing, and this is some of the other ways that you might want to be thinking about it. So I tend to think that in the discussion that is happening online, there needs to be at least some element of out of, I wasn't quite okay with that. It might be that it doesn't get hashed out in the forum, that you then call it in and have a private conversation about it, or even bring in somebody like myself to help with a particularly heated interaction that has happened between the students, but that you don't just leave it as if it didn't happen.
Thank you, Aftab. Okay, I see the time is almost wrapping. So we couldn't cover all the questions, and apologies. And also just one comment coming from Lena, just a strategy suggested, just for people with learning disabilities to share the entirety of the course notes, just so that everyone has full access to the course content. So it will be shared in the follow-up email that we're going to send out after this session. And so I think we have to wrap the Q&A part and then pass this on to Natasha just to wrap the session. So thank you very much, everyone.
Great. Thank you, Hanai. And as Hanai mentioned, we're going to have to stop here, but I want to let participants know that we have just created a new handout on inclusive online teaching, which is going to be made available in the coming days. And participants in this session will also be emailed, as Hanai said, an online feedback survey for this session, as well as a wiki link to resources. So please do make sure that you have signed in using that link in the chat box so that you can receive all of this material. Just want to send a huge thank you to all of you panelists in particular today. Afsaneh, Aftab, and Louise, thank you so much for your contributions today. Found them very, very valuable, and it was also a very last-minute workshop today, so we really appreciate your contribution there. Thank you as well to my colleagues Jocelyn, Hanai, and Ellen for facilitating and helping with all of the technical aspects today. And yeah, just thank you everyone for coming, and please stay tuned for more materials headed your way. Thank you.